like to first off just thank everyone again for being here and the TCBN for getting us all to come on a Saturday and be together. I don't know another group that could convince so many meaningful people to come out and spend time together. Today, we're talking about community benefits and how can we use investments in infrastructure to be more meaningful than just building the thing we're building. And whether that's a subway, housing, as Mayor Chow outlined, there's a lot of money being invested in, and that money has the power to do a lot more than just build infrastructure. And another thing that is being heavily invested into is building a green economy, retrofitting all the buildings that need to be retrofitted. Creates a massive catalyzing opportunity for more than just greening our economy. And I'm really fortunate today to share this table with some people who are making a meaningful dent there. Before we introduce everyone and get into it, I was just going to share a bit about myself and the work I do and how it's related to this work. My name is Mark Soberano, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Building Up. I know a lot of you through that work. Building Up is a pre-apprenticeship program connecting people with barriers to employment to careers in construction. What's unique about Building Up is that we're also a nonprofit construction company. We use renovations and primarily green retrofits in affordable housing to connect the work happening in affordable housing to the people living in affordable housing. I saw some folks from Toronto Community Housing here. Over the years, we've done millions of dollars of work with Toronto Community Housing and actually use that money to flow directly into the pockets of Toronto housing residents. There's a massive effort to reduce the amount of warm air that is leaking out of these buildings and cold air that's leaking out of these buildings so that we have to heat and cool less. But at the same time, a lot of the skills and the income that could be generated from these projects often leak out of the building. And it's work like this that allows people to connect the work in those buildings to the people living in those buildings and using it to not only improve the climate situation, the utility bill situation, but also break cycles of poverty and put people into an industry that needs people. I think one of the reasons that all of community benefits can be so meaningful is that there is a massive labor shortage in the construction industry. And there's a bit of a misunderstanding that people don't want to get into the trades. Building Up alone, we had 1,800 people apply last year to our program, of which we only had the capacity to train 100. So there is a massive demand for these jobs and opportunities that the TCBN is opening, as well as opportunities that all of us have the opportunities to open, can create more pathways for people, specifically within the green economy, where if there's a labor shortage in construction overall, I know that that's even stronger within the specific skills that are required to retrofit the buildings that need to get retrofitted. So that's a bit about what brings me to this conversation and how we envision a just transition to a net zero and inclusive green economy. But I'm just one of many people working on this and happy to be surrounded by a lot of those people today. So we're going to start with Fatima. Fatima Saya is a senior manager, social impact at the Daniels Corporation, a leading builder and developer in Toronto, Canada. As part of her role, Fatima leads the implementation of social impact strategies in Daniels master plan communities, working closely with internal teams and external partners to deliver on Daniels' commitment to building inclusive communities. In Regent Park, where Daniels has been Toronto Community Housing Corporation's development partner for phases 1, 2, and 3 of a community revitalization since 2006, Fatima works hand in hand with local residents, businesses, and community organizations to implement local economic development and social infrastructure initiatives. And our question to you, Fatima, is, hey, hello. And what does a just transition and inclusive green economy look like for you and your organization?
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. Maybe just putting it a little bit into context. why I'm here. And I think, Mark, you did a really good job of talking a little bit about the connection between workforce development and the just transition. And that's a really big piece of it. So, as part of my work, or in fact, even taking a step back, Daniel's, in terms of our purpose, we talk about our purpose being to build inclusive and sustainable communities to create a better future for all. And so the idea that sustainable, inclusive really come together is really ingrained in our understanding of our purpose as an organization. So my role directly is to deliver on that commitment to building inclusive communities. And I work really closely with our sustainability team as well in order to make sure that as we are implementing, green building strategies as we transition to a green economy, that opportunities to create jobs are really paramount there too. So, when we're talking about, just to add a little bit more color to this conversation that Mark started too around construction and opportunities that exist and the jobs that are sort of required here, in order to deliver on even planned construction over the next 6 years, we're 15,000 skilled workers short. Add in all of the workers that are retiring over the next 6 years, and that number jumps to over 70,000. So, when we're talking about just standard right now, if we're looking at what's in the pipeline for construction, we don't have enough skilled workers to get the job done. And that means that, when we're thinking about delivering on the homes that, even in Ontario, we're saying that we need to build by 2030. I think it's like 1.5 million, right? By 2031. We're nowhere near being able to have just the resources from a workforce perspective to get that done. So what that means is that as we are doing this development, and as a developer, Daniel's really believes strongly that development needs to benefit not only developers and not only the development industry, but the communities that we're building in as well. We need to be able to bring in that perspective of creating opportunities for the community members in the communities that we're building. So Mark mentioned that Daniels has been the developer partner with Toronto Community Housing for the last 17 years of the Regent Park revitalization. And interestingly, this is a community that we've been building in where we actually didn't have a community benefits agreement because the frameworks in 2006 didn't exist at the time. But that doesn't mean that we didn't see the value in it and invest in it strongly. Workforce development programs that we've actually run in collaboration, you haven't met him yet, but Mike York over there, formerly with the Carpenters. We've been working, for example, very closely with the College of Carpenters and Allied Trades, as well as Local 27, to implement workforce development programs, understanding that, hey, we're in Regent Park developing in this neighborhood, dozens of buildings here. And if we aren't looking to community members who are living in the area to create jobs, to do the upskilling, to make sure that folks have jobs that are, again, union jobs, good paying jobs, jobs with benefits in their neighborhoods, then that investment isn't going to create the impact for everyone as it should. And I think, Mayor Chow was talking about this sort of enlightened self-interest in her remarks. And I think that that's definitely a part of it. We understand that it is existential for us to have a workforce that is developed and skilled to be able to take on these roles and opportunities. And at the same time, that those opportunities then create the sort of livelihood stability and so that we as developers can keep doing what we do as well in terms of a building perspective, right? So thinking about the just transition, the reality is that, if you look at just construction jobs now, not enough. If we need workers with additional skills in green building, if we need workers to, we're going to need additional skill sets to get the job done. So for us, a just transition has a few different components, and workforce development, as I've been sort of going on and on about, is the really big one for us, right? Those really important good jobs for community members in the communities that we're building in is a really important one. Then another one that I think is important to talk about a little bit and is a really important part of Daniel's approach to sustainability. So we released a decarbonization roadmap earlier this year. And so another important part for us has been, as we've been doing this learning around sustainability, is housing affordability is another important part of the just transition to a green economy. And I think our goal is to really use our size and our scale to challenge the assumption of the sustainability premium, right? Building sustainability doesn't have to cost more, or it doesn't have to, from like a building perspective, but that cost also shouldn't be borne by people living in our communities either, right? So housing affordability is a really important part of that. So sustainable homes that are affordable means that we're really delivering homes that are cost competitive to build, and then also therefore buy or live in. And, they just really need to be affordable to the end user. Now, how we achieve that is really tied again to this workforce piece. When we're thinking about, the decisions that are made around how we're going to build a community in a more sustainable way, it's super important to, from the design phase, to work really closely. And that's what we've really done as we've done this learning, working really closely with our engineers and our architects and our, solar experts, et cetera, to ensure that we have a really solid understanding of the process so that there aren't any surprises from a cost perspective. And then the same thing goes with working with our trades and working with the unions, understanding that, hey, we know that the unions are upskilling for this. We know the carpenters are doing it, for example. Super important. And having those conversations early on so that the trades are prepared for what they're going to be seeing on site. And all of that ensures, jobs, but also that we're going to be delivering product homes that are actually making sure that housing affordability is something that's paramount. The third piece of a just transition, related as well, is about sort of that resiliency piece. So thinking about, from a building perspective, housing affordability is really important, but also from sort of an operating perspective. So we really want to make sure that homes are performing in a way that doesn't actually increase costs for people who are living in them. And that's important from a livelihood security perspective as well. So that's really those three parts, I think, Mark, are the main pieces for us of a just transition.
That's great. And you mentioned a lot about your partnership with the carpenters over the years. We are joined by the former president of Local 27, the Carpenters Union, Mike York, who I know is super committed to this because while leading the Carpenters Union in Local 27, helped more than 100 graduates of my program get life-sustaining careers in the construction industry, and also a real champion in green building as well. So Mike, the same question to you. What does a just transition inclusive economy look like for you and your work as a carpenter?
Okay, Mark, I'll get to that. But first of all, I just want to say thanks to you and the organizers at TCBN for inviting me here. And I'll throw it back out to Rosemary and John Cartwright, and Rosemary Powell, John Cartwright. When this started many, many years ago, did you ever imagine that we'd bring this many people together and just focused on creating those opportunities and just transition and sustainable development? So congrats to both of John and Rosemary, because it's just an amazing traveling voyage just to get here. So this is important. Now, folks in the room may or may not know, but look, the Carpenters, for instance, is a national organization. So when we talk about a just transition, it may mean one thing in a Toronto context, an Ontario context, but I can tell you, when we say those words in out west, Alberta, Saskatchewan, or maybe even Newfoundland and the East Coast, people don't look at that as necessarily the way they want to go. They often will see it as a threat, because our industry, our organization, has a great role in the oil and gas sector. So these are challenges that sometimes we have to take on within the organization, and they're challenges that our governments will face as well. So I think it's important for folks in the room to actually see that, not just from a specific, a micro kind of approach in Ontario, Toronto context, but just imagine the challenges that organizations face across the country. We know we have to get to this, have to get there to a sustainable economy, sustainable development, net zero. But a lot of challenges are faced internally. That is for sure, because our organization at the top faced a lot of pushback on this issue. Having said that, I will go back to Fatima's comments. We have had also some great successes. Working with employers, contractors in the industry that are open to that. But I may also reference, when we first started talking about community benefits, you don't believe the amount of pushback we got from the employer base. So to have a gem of a contractor that's willing to partner, willing to collaborate, like the Daniels, you can set benchmarks, you can actually achieve things. Whereas if you had to go to the other industry partners, they were not interested. They saw that in a very negative way. So, kudos to Daniels, because we have been partnering with that organization for well over 20 years, going back, when in south of Etobicoke, we had English as a second language for construction workers. And that was a very rudimentary training program. That evolved then into the choice program that we did at Regent Park, and working with youth and bringing young people in. That again evolved into the craft program, creating real apprenticeships for Toronto with the Daniels, to the point where we're just bringing in young people, and then, as we evolve again with building up and TCBN. So it takes a long time to get there. In terms of that's a key point for the carpenters and the other building trades, is training the next generation. But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of effort by, almost generational, because leadership comes and they retire, they move on. But the thing is, our industry has been said, I think that, Timmy, you noted workforce development stats. Tens of thousands of workers are needed in this industry. So there's huge opportunities for young people, but the pathway has to be there. And really, I believe that through collaboration and partnership, we building those pathways. And I think that the carpenters, for instance, and other building trades, we have a great track record in doing so. But that's pretty fundamental. So then how do we evolve that now to sustainable development and green economy? I'll give you a couple of observations. One is that we really need to be focused on this. And I love the idea that this is being driven by the TCBN. Because, Julia, we were just chatting, political leaders, with all due respect to my colleague at the table, look, political leaders come and go, and political parties come and go. But our position is we're here for the long term. The carpenters have been around for 140 years. We've seen politicians come, politicians go. But I love the idea this is being driven by the grassroots. That's so important, because we have to be able to keep that agenda, to keep that momentum going, no matter who's in government, the government of the day. We can work, we want to work with the government of the day, but at the same time, we're not going to be dependent upon what they bring to the table. I'll just reference one of our leading architects in the city of Toronto, Don Schmidt, Diamond & Schmidt, had a really great op-ed piece about a year ago on that same principle, that the industry, whether it's if I'm looking at sustainable development and constructions, so the industry has to drive that forward. It's got to be the design side, the union side, the developer side, FATIMA, the carpenters union, the electricians union, other unions, along with the designers. We have to drive this forward. We can't depend on the political leadership of the particular day and political geographic area. So that's one piece. I will give an observation and an anecdote. So if we look at mass timber, and that's one thing that we've really begun to focus in on and see the potential there. So I love the idea of saying, let's transform building our cities in wood as rapidly as we can. And so one of the things that I've been trying to promote with the political leadership at various levels is, if we start to take a look at our cities being built in wood, what's the impact then on Northern Ontario and Northern Canada? You have the resource extraction. That can really be of huge benefit to our Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario and Northern Canada. So in terms of resource extraction, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of design. So you kind of bring that, and then the replanting side and the forest management. So you kind of bring that as a full circle, but the benefit is It's just huge impact in the Northern Ontario and the Indigenous communities. And at the same time, we're building a more sustainable future in our construction industry in the cities of the South. So that's just one aspect that I would like to really promote and really push forward. So with that, there we are. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting note, and it kind of speaks to. Hello? Yeah, it's working. It sort of speaks to, I think, the spirit of what community benefits agreements are about. How can we be really intentional with the money we're spending? If now this forces us to have a different supply chain, great. Now that's another injection of funds, and how can that be used to build up the community? Thank you. Moving on to our next panelist here, Julia has held senior leadership positions in the environmental sector for nearly 30 years, managing campaigns and organizations, defining strategy and policy, and inspiring public and private action to address air pollution and climate change. Julia leads TAF staff in advancing the organization's solutions to climate and air pollution, and with the support of TAF's investment committee, oversees the fiscal integrity of TAF's endowment. Julia is a recipient of the 2016 Minister's Award for Environmental Excellence for her environment and climate work, and a member of the federal government's Generation Energy Council. Can't imagine a better person to ask this question to. What does a just transition and inclusive green economy look like for you and your organization?
Thanks, Mark, and thank you to TCBN for this opportunity to gather with you today. I'll do first of all, many of you, you probably know the Carpenters Union, but, and the name of Daniels, you see it everywhere. But I'll give you a very quick introduction to the Atmospheric Fund. We're an agency that was set up by the City of Toronto way back in 1991, before climate change was headline news at all, to say, okay, this is a big global issue, but what do we do about it locally, right here? And then so we have an endowment from the City of Toronto, and then in 2017 we received also an endowment from the Province of Ontario, which expanded our mandate to Greater Toronto Hamilton area, so that we can think regionally. And then we also have an endowment from the Government of Canada. And our real mandate is to advance local solutions to climate change. And we have a few key tools. We're an investor. We have these endowments, so we invest in local solutions, whether that's in retrofits or new construction or renewable energy or manufacturing of recycled batteries. Lots of interesting investment opportunities. We're a grant maker, so we support local nonprofit organizations who have great ideas about how to reduce carbon. And we run a variety of programs that can move the dial on climate. So whether that's on retrofits or electrification of transportation, and do a fair amount of policy work as well. And so we're we come at this, and I'll answer your question from the perspective of TAF's mandate. We're here to drive solutions to climate change, and the City of Toronto and the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, we have about 55 megatons of emissions, and we know where they come from. 60% of it comes from buildings. So, the space heating that we use, the electricity that we use, for heating our water, about 35% from transportation. And then there's some industrial emissions and emissions associated with waste. So, that's our mandate. But we know that only a few nerdy people like us wake up in the morning and think, how am I going to reduce carbon today? And so we've adopted a much more we call it multi-solving approach to our mandate, because we have a poly crisis. It's not just the climate crisis. We have a health crisis. We have like the disparity, economic disparity and equity challenges. We have a crisis in housing. We have to, if we're smart, solve these things together. You can't just go one by one by one. There isn't enough time, social capital, financial capital. We just can't. And so our realization, and this is how we come up the just transition, is that we have to multi-solve and embed social, financial, and environmental objectives into our work and design our programs and our work and our policies to multi-solve. And so that is an overarching philosophy and approach. It's much harder to do than to say. But how this relates to the workforce is, there's a few streams. And so, for instance, we're on the cusp of a retrofit revolution. In order to meet our climate targets, and in order to address affordability in housing, and we have to actually be retrofitting probably 5% of the building stock every year after year after year for decades. But this is actually not a problem. This is an opportunity. And so at that kind of scale, in order to meet our targets, we're going to be needing to invest $8 to $10 billion per year to do this. Again, not a problem. It's an investable opportunity, because when you invest in energy efficiency, you reduce energy costs and you have a return on investment. We know we invest in this and we make a return on our investment. And we know then that for every million, based on North American analysis of North American retrofits, for every $1 million, there's 9.5 to 11.5. There's statistical analysis about this, jobs per million, right? So if you reduce that, bring that down to an Ontario context, that's 33 million person years of employment, 33,000 rather person years of employment. And as you said, we don't have that yet. And so, that's the just transition opportunity in order to reduce emissions, improve the affordability of our homes and the comfort of our homes and the health of the places we live and work. We're going to be putting people to work. And so it's kind of that, putting that together. The same is in the new construction side. So we're going to be needing new buildings. We need the workforce for that. But those buildings need to be built in the right place, in the right way, from a low carbon and resilience perspective, in order to achieve those multiple benefits. The same in the energy sector. We need to be transitioning away from high carbon to low carbon electricity to run our buildings and run our businesses. The workforce for doing that low carbon initiative is actually part of that just transition. So, we can talk about a lot of practical ways about how to integrate that. I know Mayor Chow talked about, how we build that in, and we've been building this into a lot of the financing that we do. We've worked with Building Up. Again, it's easier said than done, but it's doable. And so we can share some ideas about how we actually do that.
Yeah, Mark, I just wanted to respond. And Julia, your kind of figures that you're just kind of laying out there around job creation, that's exactly the kind of response that, people like me and others in the organization need to deliver to our membership on the East Coast and in the West. Absolutely, because the benefit is there. It's not just a loss, but through the transition, there's something to be gained as well. So if I just drill down and say, what's in it for me? Well, there are jobs. You may lose a job in this particular area as it's transitioned out, but really there's so much more to be coming as we go through the transition.
What's in it for me is the carbon reduction. So we all win, right?
Yeah.
And I think on behalf of everyone here, I'm wondering if we can all steal some of your ideas there, that these are not challenges, they're opportunities. And that we have multiple crises coming from multiple angles, so we need to multi-solve them. And I think that's really what TCBN and everyone here advocates for, which is how do we get more than one benefit out of the issues that are plaguing us the most at the time. Moving over to you, Julie DeBrusen is a longtime resident of Toronto Danforth, who is committed to building up federal support for a strong, safe, and sustainable city. She advocates for public transit, housing, the arts, and small business. Julie has worked with the community on strengthening gun control and taking action to fight climate change. Currently, she is a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and a member of Natural Resources Committee. So, what does a just transition and inclusive green economy look like for you?
Thank you. And really great to see so many people out here today, because this is perhaps one of the most important conversations that we are having right now. It's about the environment and reducing the natural disasters that we're seeing with greater frequency in our country. And in fact, tends to impact people disproportionately based on income too, right? If you don't have air conditioning and you're in the middle of a heat dome, you are experiencing the climate change in a different way. I mean, that's just one example, but so I think that it's important for us. I find sometimes when we're talking about GHGs, it seems like it's an out there concept, but it is something that we're experiencing day to day in our communities right across the country. And it's also, I love the segue going from where Julia and Mike left it. It's also a time of enormous opportunity here for our country. This is a time when there are so many jobs, good paying jobs, that can become available to people. And it's just about how we get there. So I want to say two things. One part is just about the title and the dual role I hold, because I think that it's a new thing. We don't usually have a parliamentary secretary who does energy and natural resources and at the same time does environment and climate change. That was a bit of a shift. And the reason that I have that job is to really make sure that the two departments, two ministry teams are talking with one another, because so much of what we're doing has a crossover impact. And so when we're looking, Mike was talking about extractive industries and all of that. How do we talk about all of that while taking into account environment and climate change? How do we look the other way too, back and forth? So some of the main things I'm working on right now tie into the topics that we've been talking about a lot today. For example, I'm working on a green building strategy. On the side of environment and climate change, we have put together, we have an act that now requires us to report to Parliament every few years on where we are on emissions reductions. The largest source of emissions from the city of Toronto or Montreal is our buildings, which is something that doesn't actually come up that much. We don't talk about it as much, but it's in fact the case. It's the third largest source of emissions across our country. And taking action on that part about the emissions from our buildings has the double effects. And I think it is important that we always talk about the opportunities in all of this, because it will make living in those homes more comfortable and more affordable as we do these retrofits. But getting there is not going to be easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat that either. But I wanted to highlight that because I think it's important to think about it in both ways. We're talking about the opportunities at the same time as we're trying to fight climate change. I'll also say another piece. I feel like my life lives in a lot of doubles. The other double is a double bubble. So we talk a lot about the Ottawa bubble. People will say, oh, they're in this Ottawa bubble. But we also sometimes live in bubbles in our own communities. So I find it really interesting when I'm in Ottawa and I hear exactly like Mike was talking, people who live in very different communities from mine, talking about how they experience the words we use, if we use words like just transition, what their hopes and aspirations are, may feel very differently in different communities. So there's a learning piece. And I that's the advantage in some ways, is that I get to bring our voice as in Toronto people to Ottawa. And at the same time, I get to hear what other people are saying and say, okay, like that's, might not always shift me in how I feel, but it is important to always be taking into account that we're seeing things differently and we're going to have to try and row this ship together. So onto the sustainable jobs part. We've talked a lot about the base principles to it. I think there's a lot of agreement there. One of the parts, RBC had a study that said that there are 400,000 jobs that they see coming out of the green transition in our country. So that's 400,000 additional jobs. That's a huge opportunity. How do we get people to be able to seize them, and how do we how do we create it that is an inclusive opportunity in our communities as well? That can't be overlooked. Right now, we tabled a piece of legislation called the Sustainable Jobs Act. In fact, we're not really using the word just transition. That does, it informs, also just transition, how we're looking at things, but sustainable jobs is a bit more global too, in looking at not just the transition, but also what are the job opportunities that are out there. And I'm going to say for all of you, because I think it's really important for you to be able to track it, if you go, there's a website called ourcommons.ca. It's like OURCOMMONS.ca. If you Google it, you can track any piece of legislation and you can see what's happening in committees when people are talking about it if you go to that website. So if you looked up, the number for this piece of legislation is C50. If you put in the word sustainable jobs, you'll also probably pull it up. And that's a way that you can not only look at the text, but I will tell you, it's also going to be coming up for a committee. We're going to be having witnesses coming and talking about the legislation, what they think they like about it, what they'd like to see changed, how they see it impacting communities. So it's an opportunity for you to follow along and also then reach out to your MPs with any comments that you have about it. That public engagement of making sure that people know it's not something happening far away. This is something that you can actually watch and be a part of is really important. That's my starting point on sustainable jobs. If I can have a few more minutes, I'll tell you actually what we're doing in that piece of legislation so you don't just have to read it. The Sustainable Jobs Plan actually creates a framework for what we're looking at for a green economy. And three most important parts that I see. One, it requires that every 5 years we table in Parliament a plan, an action plan for what are we doing on sustainable jobs. We already tabled the first one. We had the first Sustainable Jobs Plan that was put out earlier this year that you can look at, and it sets out how we're going to be getting to create those new job opportunities. And it's going to change over time, right? Because what you see as the job opportunities now, in 5 years, there are going to be different challenges and different opportunities. The second part to it that feeds into this plan is that we're going to have an advisory council. I think there are 15 seats on this advisory council. One of the important parts in how it's set up is to make sure that workers have a seat at that table. Workers have to have a say in how this is going to happen. So it's going to be bringing together people. They're going to be advising as to how the data gets collected. They're going to be also advising as to how the plan has to get drafted. They're going to be the real drivers on this. And the final part that I think is really important is it creates a way for different departments across the government to be working together on it. Again, just like my dual role, branches between two ministerial teams and two departments that might not always talk to each other, not out of not wanting to, but just they kind of get into their silo. There's going to be actually a setup plan for how do we talk across the different departments and different ministerial teams to make sure that we're all working on sustainable jobs together. If I can give a couple of examples, because I think in the hope part, this isn't just about the specific jobs. It's not just about the specific workers. It's also about the communities and how this impacts communities where the workers live in all of these places. So when we're talking about it, I've seen a few examples that are very good examples of how some skills can be really transferable too. So just recently I was talking to some people. They're working on geothermal. They build geothermal systems. They're former oil sands workers because in fact, it's all drilling. I'm not saying it's exactly the same skills, but they're closely related skills. So these are people who originally were working in oil sands and now they're working in geothermal. They're bringing their knowledge. They did have to change their skills a bit, but they're seizing those opportunities. And by any stretch, that's where the opportunities lies in renewables. That's one example. Another example is right now, there is huge opportunity in the Atlantic provinces for wind turbines and wind power. And again, that's an area, I was talking with some people who are working on wind turbines here in Ontario. They were coming from different skill sets and different jobs, but they had things like millwork skills, they had things like electrical skills, and they were able to transfer them over to how they were going to work on wind turbines. So they're not always completely different jobs. Like this is there are many opportunities where we're bringing a similar skill set, and then maybe you need to just get that extra piece where you learn about a different industry that's related, but that has huge opportunity. So if I can leave it with that part, one, please make sure that you track the legislation. I think it's really important for people to have a hands-on knowledge of what's going on. Let's talk about what the challenges are. I think we should be open about it. I think we should be open that there are going to be some people and some communities that are going to feel deeply concerned, and that's fair, and we need to meet that head on. And then let's also talk about what the opportunities are, because there are many, and we have to make sure that when we do this, we're setting ourselves up to seize them. That's my piece. Thanks.
Thanks. It's really interesting to hear from the perspective of like who could be left out of this transition, and then how do we also bring them in? I think that also kind of embodies the spirit of what this is all about. Given that community benefits is all about giving all of us the voice, I wanted to sort of turn it over to the floor here, the floor being you, I don't know if floor is the right word, you people, to ask any questions to the group, and if anything from what you've heard is inspiring any questions with you.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm sorry I did not get the slide that you told, regarding the job search. Could you just repeat it once again a little bit?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was trying, I didn't want to take too much time, but yes, it's Our Commons. It's the two words, Our and Commons, one word in the website. So OurCommons.ca. It's a really great website. You can look up words and see who's been talking using a certain word. It's actually an amazing resource, and it pulls up all of the debate, all of the work that's happening at committees. The sustainable jobs piece I was talking to you about is going to a committee called the Natural Resources Committee, and you can track it from there.
Thank you very much.
I saw the gentleman in the further back, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Hi there. I just had a question regarding, I guess, opportunities for smaller businesses in this whole transition period. What we were seeing sort of in Toronto and in the surrounding areas is that a lot, given the scale of the problem that we're facing, it seems to bias these solutions to large firms, large engineering firms, large architecture firms, large developers, large builders. So what are the opportunities for community-based companies or small businesses that are based in our communities? How do they get involved in this? Because it seems like a lot of the time they're being shut out of these processes rather than being joined.
Yeah, great question. Thanks. So yeah, this is where we can get into like the practical stuff about how do we make community benefits real and happen. And so a lot of the big projects like the Ontario line or the Crosstown, et cetera, are big consortiums. We know when those projects are going to happen, and they've got these really big, sort of bidding systems. But what the community benefits agreements have done with those big consortiums is push it down to, a requirement to hire from the community. So we have like a mechanism where you require the big firms to then go into community. Then there's a more disaggregated reality. When we're talking about housing or in retrofits and even like community renewables, these are not mega infrastructure projects. These are, a building here, a building there, or maybe a portfolio. Somebody's got 7 apartment buildings or is going to do, a few megawatts of solar. And that's where I think we need to sort of like start pushing this down even further into those, into the developers of those projects, and say, here are some tools that you can use to actually make the projects work with and for the community. So these are, like, I don't want to say light or anything, but, like use those fantastic community benefit agreements that we've got and bring them into procurement. Because as when we do a retrofit, we actually have to put out a bid document and say, we're looking for these goods and services. So if we can actually embed community benefits, so social procurement, into our RFPs, our requests for proposals, and then it basically puts it's the spin on, this is what I want. I want community organizations. I want smaller businesses who can bring in community employment. So if you ask for it, you will get it, right? So I think part of it is, just asking and making that clear. The other is to reduce the burden on the bidders, right? So if you're a small firm, like I'm sure you've seen some of the city RFPs or God knows what the Ontario line RFP is going to be like, but it's really tough to fill out those forms, and so we have to actually recognize, if we want community benefits, we're going to have to make it easy and practical for the people who bring community benefits to apply and to bid in. And then on the evaluation side, what we found, and it's really interesting, we've got some very standardized guidelines, historically, this is what we look for, value for dollar, blah, blah. So we have to actually internalize community benefits as something that we want and evaluate bids fairly and appropriately in order to not as so much favor community benefits, but give them a fair ability to compete within a very traditional system of value for dollar. So that's that practical. It's not sexy, but it's super powerful in terms of making those community benefits, bringing them into the mix.
I think just to follow up, Julia's really laid out that kind of overall perspective in terms of the sector if we're looking at construction. But I would mention that, because your point is well taken, is very clear. But if you look at it, that's depending upon the scale. But if you're looking at drilling down, as you mentioned, the retrofits and things like that, then you get to a smaller scale. And the way that the construction industry works often is, so for instance, a company like a Daniels or an Ellis Don or a PCL, they may have dozens of smaller contractors working for them on specific projects. So that's the opportunity that for the smaller contractors to say, okay, Daniels may have 2 or 3 buildings. So if they divide up the flooring, for instance, or the doors or the millwork or the drywall into smaller components on a building by building basis, that's the opportunity for smaller contractors to get their foot in the door, so to speak, on these much larger projects, because you can't start at the top and take on a huge project on scale. But you certainly can start at a much smaller element or on a smaller scale in the construction sector. I don't know if anyone else has. See a couple of people look at me.
Well, okay.
All right.
I'll add something after, but.
Okay.
I should just say that they just told me to wrap it up, so this is unfortunately going to be the last question, but
It's just getting interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you say a finished question,
Go ahead.
greetings everyone. Happy to see everyone here today. And as you know that we are not coming to the problem. And I just want to thank Rosemary and others for pushing this community benefit. I will need for a long time. There's a lot of problem in it, So I'm not the sugarcoat guy, you know what I mean? I'm not here to sugarcoat it and make everything pretty, right? Because we know that we have an issue in the workforce. The workforce is dominated by white people. We have black contractors who be denied lots of opportunities as much as we're talking about success. These are some of the things that we want to talk about, that how black contractors can get the opportunity that they can hire black youth too, right? Now we're talking about apprenticeship programs and stuff like that, and training, right? Training is limited, okay? With the local, with 27, 183, we have all different union local, it's limited, right? It's only can accommodate so many youths at a time, right? Our local that book out until next year, right? And people on the waiting list, waiting, right? So what about all those youths, what is waiting, right? And there is no opportunity out there for them. There are a lot of community organizations, the government giving you this, giving you that, giving you that. There is no space for any community organization to say, well then, yes, this is where the youth can go. A community organization, institution, the youth, there is nothing like that. consistency of work again is a problem for the youth. So let's not build up them hope and tell them, oh, there's lots of work and 90,000 people gonna lay off. It's the real deal. They come to me every day. You understand what I mean? So the company them out there need to be adjusted. You have a lot of racist company out there. They don't like to see the black youth, and then give them 3-4 weeks, 2 months worth of work, and then so OUT, them get laid off. Like it's hard. You know what I mean? Because every day I get calls from it, right? We train the youth them, and sometimes there is no job out there. Okay? We have members from your local, my local, every local, waiting at the call to go to work. Okay? Right now. And they have got a job. So when you show up with this thing I'm talking about, there's a lot of work out there, and all of these pretty tough, it's okay. I wonder if it's political or if it's serious. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I face it every day with the youth out there. Right? And you're going to take them from one environment, and then you build up them home, and then you distribute them on the road again looking for work. You know what I mean? And you have a lot of company with a lot of prejudice going on inside here, microaggression and racism. You understand me? They have to deal with big time. Okay? So it's more than just what we're talking about, but at least we're having a conversation and say how we can fix it and how we can move forward and how black contractors can get work and black youths can be consistent. Consistency is key to success. Don't just come here 2 weeks or whatever, 3 weeks or whatever, and you say, call it a program over there, and then that little program. Hey, that don't cut it. That pastor living gone high. Okay? People can't afford rent. Okay? So this is not a joke thing we deal with to use their life. We don't want to build up their muscles and cut them down, and then they come back to the same schism, and then say, screw this guy, you go here and this guy. You have some guys that don't deal with you, they will not respect. They give this color boundary and this color will come to break that down. We're talking about diversity, inclusion, and all of that. Why? The world create diversity already, so we don't have a problem with diversity. You understand what I mean? That shouldn't have to be a problem. That is more political, right? So if you talk about inclusion, include where? Inclusion means for the black man, diversity and inclusion means exclusion and discrimination. Mark,
I know I'm looking at Kumsa, I know he's looking at you, that we have to wrap up, but I'd really like just an opportunity to thank this gentleman for his comment and just respond very briefly, because I think he's made really good points, and if we're not engaging with them, I think that we're really missing an opportunity here. So just, I'm going to commandeer the conversation really quickly. So I really appreciate this comment. I think it's really important. I think it's actually related. So I was wanting to talk a little bit about the small business question as well, and I think actually these pieces are really related. So first, when it comes to community benefits, like a big part of it we've been talking about through procurement. So social procurement is actually a really big priority and a big part of community benefits. And so the responsibility to engage with small suppliers, with diverse suppliers, really is on us as a developer, and we take that really seriously to make sure that we're creating connections with these small businesses and understanding how we can bring them in to the opportunities that we're creating and investing in, right? And I think that that's a really big piece. So on our end, it's something that we're working on currently, on developing not just a roster. I mean, we've got suppliers and contractors that we've been working with for decades, and we haven't necessarily asked the question, are you Black owned? Are you woman owned? Are you employing folks, diverse folks from the communities that you're working in? And so it's important to have an understanding of those questions. But one thing I'll also say is, and this comes back to the point that Mike was making, like developers are working with a number of smaller contractors that are local contractors from the communities that we're working in. And yes, there's a major issue in construction that the diversity that we're seeing in our communities isn't represented in the companies and on the construction sites. And there's a lot of different ways to address that. One way is, definitely working with diverse suppliers directly. Another way is actually through engaging with the suppliers that exist, though they may not be diverse, and saying, hey, how are you going to step up to the plate here? And how can we help you do that? And so partnership, I think, is a really big piece here. And it's how we've been working with our trades and contractors, with the carpenters, to actually bring folks into the industry. So, we're able to put into our contract language. So when we're hiring a carpentry contractor to work on one of our sites, we're able to ask the questions, particularly in big master plan communities, which I work in, saying, okay, are you going to participate in the workforce development programs that we're going to be, creating an opportunity for you to participate in, right? Thinking of it as, we know that there are job opportunities. We know that people are looking for work. And we know that some of these smaller contractors don't actually have the capacity to go out and do outreach and hire from the local community. But that's okay, because guess what? We can do it in partnership with the carpenters. We can go out, do the outreach, find folks from the community, primarily young youth of color who are looking for really stable employment. And it's not just about getting them into the trades. That's the easy part, I guess. But it's about connecting them to the training, making sure that with the training, they get a job opportunity, a placement opportunity to get those skills on site. And that's where we come in, because we're an employer. We can call up our trades and say, hey, can you take a placement participant? From this program that we have with the carpenters. They're trained, they've gotten pre-employment training, all of that. So the entire employment pathway needs to be figured out. And then that sort of wraparound support piece too, and we're talking about, there's a lot of folks on the out of work list waiting for a call. A really important part that we've realized in our work with the carpenters as well is that folks can have training, they can have experience, but sometimes going out, putting themselves out there, getting the job, it's still a challenge. And so that's actually the soft skill piece of the training that needs to be a part of it too. And so I totally appreciate the comment, because there's so many different components of this and it's not easy or straightforward. But I think partnerships is a really big way that we're going to be able to overcome that and have to keep pushing forward on it. So that's my too long comment. Yeah, I know. Kumsa really wants to kick us out of here. Thank you, Kumsa.
You got a question?
No,
We'll have to do it after.
one comment if I could. Fatima, you had said that you ask contractors if they're going to participate. It needs to move from ask to this is what you're going to do in order to
And if I could just add to what the brother just said, it's not just asking. We need timelines, we need accountability. None of this in 10 years, you will eventually get there. It's timeline, it's accountability, and it's now. You can't be saying that there are jobs out there, the people are trained, and where's the connection? Enough is enough. No more talk, action. And action with time limits and accountability now.